Hey everyone, welcome back to the District 3 podcast. My name is Irvin.
And Miggs.
And Elena's not here with us today. So we're doing this, I guess it's like a boys only episode this time without Elena. Don't get too wild now, Miggs. But Miggs, you did you celebrate Thanksgiving yesterday with your family?
I did. It was a small Thanksgiving, but I got to carve the turkey, and this is like my third year doing it, and okay. I'm getting like really good at it. This time I was like, oh wow, like nice. it was fast. Like I didn't have many troubles taking like the joints off and stuff. So
you cut it? You cut the turkey?
Yeah.
That was your responsibility?
Yeah.
Do they usually give like that?
I tried to get my dad to do it, but he was like, no, you've been doing it. I was like, all right. But I did a good job. I was surprised. I was like, oh, man, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm. and this was was this your first dry Thanksgiving in a while? Or when did you do dry?
That was last year. I'm not sure if I drank for Thanksgiving or not last year. But, yeah, usually, I won't do too much until after I leave. And if I go meet up with friends, then.
Afterwards. Once you're away from your parents, then
because why get drunk with them, It's good to get drunk with them.
It's different.
I feel like I enjoy having a drink with my mom. Like, my mom doesn't, now she doesn't drink that much anymore. But like I enjoy like having a drink and just talking with her, because I feel like when she drinks she loosens up a little bit more and is able to kind of talk about like past history, like when she was younger, or like I'll ask her about my dad, or I'll ask her about
getting deep when you drink.
Yeah, like my mom is not a very emotional person. The first time she ever said I love you was on Facebook.
Oh wow!
But she obviously always shows it. Like she's always been the most loving mother. Probably the person that is willing to hide a dead body for me if I were ever to do that. But she just was never taught, to. And I think a lot of our parents are kind of like that, where their parents didn't show them, love in a way that was like very open, very like hugging and all of that. My mom wasn't like that, but she always showed me with her actions. She always made sure that we were fed, that we had everything that we needed, and she always showed up for me. And she was never like, I never, how like Latino kids, like we get hit by our parents when we're younger, when we mess up. My mom never hit me.
Oh wow.
Like never, and when my dad would try,
you turned out this way. Right? You're telling me violence?
I had a dad. I had a dad.
Okay.
I had a dad, but even my dad though, when he would hit me, like he would apologize like 10 minutes later. He'd be and he'd be crying. He'd like, I'm sorry. And then it's one of those things when you think about it, you're kind of like, oh, like my parents didn't have the tools to deal with kids and didn't know how to properly like tell us what was wrong, and they thought that violence was the way to show us quickly. And I don't know. I've never been a fan of hitting kids. I've never been a fan of parents doing that. But I also understand that they don't have the tools to deal with things, maybe the way that we have.
Yeah, I was gonna say that whole love thing. My mom would say it all the time.
Did you say that whole love thing?
Too. Yeah, but she also beat me all the time.
All the time.
Listen to both.
You lost your bus pass, motherfucker. It got stolen. No. But my dad, that was a hard. I remember when my parents moved to Arkansas and I stayed in L.A., because why would I want to move to Arkansas living in L.A.? I was like, Mom, I'm 18. I am staying out here. But when they left, like my dad, like he hugged me, and then like he couldn't even get the words out, like to tell me that. But I can just tell, like like I just want to tell you that blah blah blah, and I was like, yeah, Dad, like I know, and like gave him a hug, and then they drove off to Arkansas, and I stayed in
L.A.
Oh man.
messing things up, being young, dumb, and stupid. And now I'm here in Arkansas, yo.
Growth.
But
Growth.
you said you had some things that you wanted to share, Miggs, about that you weren't included in the
Oh,
last
yeah,
episode.
yeah. So the only thing, so I said I was thankful for pretty much like my job, my parents, and friends. The one thing I did mention that I did want to mention was this podcast, man. Well, maybe not the podcast. Well, yeah, I love this thing. But like you and Elena, man. I always feel like myself like a very progressive person, and like ahead of the curve and doing all these things, and especially when it comes to friends and stuff like that, and people that I know, and but then you guys humble me sometimes, like I say some things, and I'm like, man, like I am a little out of touch, like, oh, you can't say that anymore. What do you mean?
Look,
so thank you for keeping me. Yeah.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Just know that I'm also constantly being educated on things that I say that might be wrong or that I don't understand the complexities of it. There's different things, and I think as long as you can acknowledge that maybe what you say is wrong and you learn and you maybe change that in the future, I think that's the most important thing. But it'd be a whole other thing if like we tell you something and you're like, nah, I'm just gonna keep on saying this. I don't care who it hurts, right? I don't think that's good. But I know you've made changes. I've made changes too, just throughout the years.
I think my downfall is that usually when people criticize me, like I'll fight it. Like or act a little like I don't
defensive.
Yeah, I get a little defensive and stuff like that. But I will fix it. And that comes. That's just how I do things.
It's a process.
Yeah, you messed up. No, I didn't. You messed up. And then I'd be like, fuck, I can't believe I messed up. Never doing that again. And I'm never going to let him call me out again.
I feel that. And I think this actually might be one of the episodes where we get educated on some other things as well. So I'm glad to have our guest here today. Joining us today is
Jonathan Peraza Campos,
organizer and program specialist for Teaching Central America. And also, he used to be in Arkansas as well. Now you're in Georgia. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm great. I'm, post Thanksgiving meal, recovering.
What'd y'all eat?
We had, we always make panes con pollo, panes rellenos. That's kind of our go-to.
Yeah,
salvis,
Dude, I've been seeing those on Snapchat. I'm like, oh man, I'm fucking craving that now.
Yeah, but this time around, we weren't feeling chicken because we do chicken every year. So my mom made carne guisada instead. So same spice mix, but a beef, and we had some mac and cheese. We had some ham, make it a little bit more American. My sister made some churro cheesecake. So, yeah, no complaints.
Did you have a food coma after all that?
Yeah.
Did you overeat? Yeah. I usually don't overeat, but Thanksgiving is the day where I overeat.
I'm a small guy, I can't really eat that much, but, I'll always go back for seconds and thirds and fourths in small portions. Maybe I had too much wine, if anything,
I feel that, man.
It was, it was a good night. It was a good night. I'm grateful.
I think this was the first time that we had turkey in years. We normally don't do turkey, but we actually had a gathering with my wife's family, and my wife's sister-in-law is American, and this was going to be the first time she ever cooked the turkey. So she wanted to cook a turkey for us. She cooked turkey and ham. It was really, really good. Yeah, I really enjoyed, and then we also shout out to this lady. There's this lady in Rogers, se llama Elsa, who cooks she gets hired to cook for people.
Oh, wow. She's not the girl from Frozen?
No, not this one.
That one.
I think this one might be Salvadorian too, or Salvadorian or Mexican, I believe. I think she's Salvadorian. But so sometimes whenever we have an event at the house and we just can't cook, we hire her, and she makes like a bunch of delicious food. This time she made like macaroni and cheese. She made mashed potatoes and gravy and like vegetables and sides. And we took those sides to the party over there in Fort Smith. And yeah, I had 2 plates. I did not have wine because my wife's family doesn't drink, so I had 1 Cayman Jack before going.
Okay.
But Cayman Jack just doesn't hit,
Still
man.
loosen it up,
I don't know about you've had Cayman Jacks before.
It's all right.
I just feel like
it's more sugar than the good stuff,
I feel like I'm just putting poison in my body for no reason because it doesn't do anything to me, and the taste is kind of
Yeah.
So, but hey. Having a good dry time for the most part with the family was great. And I'm not really a Thanksgiving kind of guy that I'm like, oh, I'm celebrating Thanksgiving, but I do reflect on what I'm thankful for.
Mm-hmm.
I do that a lot, but I think on that day when I'm just surrounded by like family, it hits me a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
And things like having your family be healthy, is big, and just being together and having a good time, I think makes me feel good.
Right.
And your family is living here in Arkansas, right? Even though you live in Georgia, Jonathan?
Yeah. I'm the odd one out. My siblings, my mom, they live in Springdale. We've been here before. We grew up here I grew up here for part of my early childhood, before moving to Atlanta. But the way that life goes, you move wherever life feels better, life feels safer, you have a higher quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, it felt like Arkansas. So my family moved back here after moving back to Georgia, then New York, because that's where we grew up too. And so Arkansas's, it's home, but it's not home. Part of me's in Arkansas. That's why I keep coming back. I try to get involved every time. But yeah, my family's here now, and so this is home for a minute, along with Metro Atlanta.
And you said that your family like moves a lot. Y'all have moved to New York. Y'all used to live in California as well.
I was born in LA.
You're born in LA?
I was born in LA, like
wow.
many Salvis, many Salvadoran Guatemalans like me. And then, we grew up in New York, where a lot of our family's at. And then we moved to Arkansas, then Atlanta, then back to New York, now back here.
New York.
Yeah.
Hey, does your family live in Rogers?
Now we live in Springdale.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever hear that thing that I guess for Hispanics, the majority of Hispanics in Rogers are Salvadorian?
I did hear that. Yeah.
That's why there's a pollo campero in the Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's no other pollo campero in states.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that still there? Is the pollo
Yeah,
campero still
dude.
there?
I go there once a month.
I gotta check it out.
Is it pretty good? I've never.
I
I've
like
heard
the
about
chicken.
it.
Their sides are whatever. I used to get the plantains, and I used to like their mashed potatoes, but I think the mashed potatoes are off the menu now. So pollo campero, if you're hearing this,
Sponsor us.
Sponsor us and bring the mash back.
Oh, that would be sick.
What, to get a sponsorship?
Yeah, just be eating fried chicken here.
Maybe, I don't know. After you made fun of their sides, I don't know if they're gonna want to. But
We're saying there's room for improvement.
Yeah. And if they sponsor, it's like, bam, best
sides
everything.
ever.
Yeah. That
circle.
coleslaw fire.
Oh man. Oh. So
Chicken, hey.
you went to the school system here in Springdale, but you didn't go to high school here. You went to Georgia, and I believe you went to the university over there in Georgia as well, right? How was that experience just in general, like when you made that move? And you made that move, I'm guessing, because of your family, because you were still in high school, right? So your family left to Georgia, and then you left too?
Well, we moved from New York, where a lot of my family lives, when I was in the third grade or so, to here to Arkansas, to Springdale, Arkansas.
Okay.
So I grew up in the 2000s, like 2003 to 2009 or so. Like I grew up here for 5 years of my life, which isn't a long time, in the grand scheme of things, but it was third grade to 8th grade. Those are formative years. I was here as a child in elementary school. I lived my middle school years, so really important years, up until 8th grade. So I went through Elmdale Elementary here in Springdale, went to Hellstern Middle School, and then my last year in Arkansas was at Central Junior High.
Oh, wow.
And then we moved out to I finished middle school over there in 8th grade in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta. And high school, college, grad school, all that was done over there.
How do you feel about bouncing back and forth between Arkansas and Georgia? Because you lived over there, you came over here, and then you left again. Is that not does that not affect you to bounce back and forth?
I hated the moving, I hated the moving a lot. You never feel like you get to lay down roots anywhere. You never get to really make a strong group of friends. But at the same time, we didn't have family here in Arkansas. We were the odd ones in our family. Everybody's in New York. We have a few people in Georgia, which is what took us over there. And so moving around really, destabilized. There was no balance growing up. But at the same time, as an adult now, as somebody that teaches in Southern school systems, as somebody that does research. My research focus as a grad student is Latinos and Central Americans in the South. Like, how did we get here? What brought us here? Why are we here? All these questions, and my commitment to teaching kids in states like Georgia, like Arkansas, bringing the kind of content that I bring. Like, it's all influenced by the fact that I felt that way growing up. I felt lonely. I felt misunderstood. I felt the racism, the discrimination in these southern states. I felt the isolation, the shame in being who I was, and how my schools made me feel ashamed too. And so all these things, while it sucked growing up as an adult, looking back on my experience, it's what motivated me to become who I am today, to do the work that I do today. And so it's one of those things where what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's part of what made me who I am, and no regrets at this point. It's like this is the cards that were given to me, and it's my turn to play them.
What are some of the differences that you see between Georgia and Arkansas in regards to, I don't know, like maybe the way the government interferes with certain things, with education specifically, just politics in general, and then way of living? Like, what are some of the things that you can kind of think about from the top of your head and be like, oh, these are very similar, or these are very different?
Well, I will say that, like, demographically, like, there's Latinos anywhere and everywhere you go. The South is one of the biggest places receiving, destinations for immigrants. Like, our numbers have skyrocketed since the 90s, and even before the 90s and up. But I will say that Atlanta, you see a lot more diversity. It's a bigger city, It's like a little mini New York of the South, is how I think about it. It's a southern state, Georgia is, but Atlanta's a big city and trying to become an even bigger city. And so it's an urban center in the South. And so, I grew up around, like, black folks and a lot more different, Caribbean and Central American populations in New York. When I moved to Arkansas, there was no black people. That was wild to me. It was so wild to me. There was no black people when so many of my friends in New York were black kids, African Americans. And then there was no Dominicans, no Puerto Ricans. There was Salvadorans, But here I found, like, Mexicans and Salvadorans beefed a lot. And I wasn't used to Mexicans before in New York. But Mexicans, Marshallese kids, from the Marshall Islands, white folks. My teachers were white in New York, but I didn't grow up around white people like that. But then I moved over here, and it was very white and brown, and that was very wild to me. But moving to Atlanta, I was surrounded by black kids again. It was black, it was brown, it was Asian too. There was I went to school with a lot of Vietnamese kids. But then you meet Africans, you meet Asians from different countries, you meet Latinos from so many different countries in Atlanta because it's such a diverse urban center. But both Georgia and Arkansas are the South too. And you see that the politics of the South when they try to pass anti-immigrant legislation, that try to police us, that try to, detain us, deport us, create an economy around detention centers, create an economy around putting us in prisons, but also work really hard to keep us dumb, keep our literacy rates down, to keep us uneducated, miseducated. They don't give us the equity that we need. And, southern states compared to places like California, like Texas, like Latinos have been there for a long, long, long time. And because we're like a quote unquote newer population, they don't know what to do with us. They don't have the interpreters that our parents need to access education. They don't have enough Latino teachers, bilingual teachers to help access for students. They don't teach us in a way that really speaks to us, to our experiences in the curriculum. And then you think about ESOL or ESL, I don't know what y'all call it here, like English language learners, right? Like, they're even left behind even more. Immigrant students are left behind especially. And so these things are a very southern phenomena. You'll see it everywhere you go, but the South in states like Arkansas and Georgia, you'll see the education inequity when it comes to Latino and immigrant students that hurts us. And it's almost intentional, if not fully intentional, when you look at the policies that people are passing, in our very red Republican conservative states.
Going back to the ESL thing, I remember, whenever you would get here to Springdale, sometimes they would put you in ESL even though you weren't supposed to be in there.
And we still see that today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the story is behind that. I don't know if that's a funding thing because it helps out with funding to have a certain amount of brown kids in ESL or what that is, but
And in jails.
that too. I mean, that's like there's a high. I mean, Arkansas just in general. I think we're third in incarceration, just in general. Not for Latinos, but just in general. We have like higher incarceration rates in some countries here in Arkansas. So I definitely get where you're coming from in regards to the education aspect of trying to dumb us down, trying to restrict us, trying to hold us back, and I think a lot of that is not only just in education, but just in general. People don't want us to vote. You know, that's why they haven't passed immigration reform for many years. Like, they don't want us to give us the opportunity to have more power in this country. So for you, you're obviously education is the most important. It's like kind of like the central part of your work. And you're with an organization called Teaching Central America. What do you do there for Teaching Central America, and what is the organization about?
So I'm a sixth grade teacher by day, but in my free time, I like to really focus on Teaching Central America. So that is a program that's part of this organization called Teaching for Change, and Teaching for Change was born in the 1980s. It was formerly known as NECA, the Network of Educators Committees for Central America, because this was the time that El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala were experiencing civil wars that the U.S. government was funding, mind you. They were giving dictators bombs and weapons, training soldiers here in Georgia, where I live now, matter of fact. And so that Southern Central America connection is really important for me, but NECA, which is now Teaching for Change, that's what they were doing in the 80s. There was all these teachers receiving kids from El Salvador, from Guatemala, from Nicaragua, telling them these wild stories about how much death, how much violence they were living as children, and all the worries that they had about their family members being killed by soldiers, by the war. All that was happening at that time, and these teachers were hearing these stories. And so they formed NECA, these committees across the U.S., especially Washington, D.C., where NECA started. And in Canada, they were fundraising for teachers in El Salvador, teacher unions, supporting them, protesting the U.S. government support of these dictatorships. But as teachers, their big thing was like, well, how can we as teachers help inform other people about what's happening in these countries, about why these kids are coming over here? And so they were doing workshops, doing fundraisers, they were creating curriculum. And, years and years passed, and in the 90s, that's when a lot of peace accords were signed, the wars ended. And Teaching for Change, evolved into just being a social justice education organization, teaching Black history, Latino history, women's history, environmental history, right? All these things it brings social justice into the classroom, and support teachers in doing that. But 2014, the unaccompanied child minors from Central America was in the news, it was blasting in the news. It was a big talking point for conservative policy and politicians. And they were just dehumanizing us once again, just like they did in the 80s and the 90s when we were coming to flee war. These kids are coming, and nobody knows why. Nobody knows why. These kids are just coming. They're breaking the law. They're invading the country, right? These are the talking points. And so Teaching for Change, again, restarted. The caravans, right? They started that initiative of Teaching Central America in 2014 to really put Central America back on the map, to help teachers and their students have the resources, the lesson plans that they can download on the website, knowing what movies to watch, what books to read, to help inform themselves as teachers, but also their students about, what is this history of Central America? Why are people coming? Because people don't leave because they want to most of the time. They leave because they have to. And Central America, just like in the 80s and the 90s, we're still going through a lot of things politically, economically, but we're also experiencing but there's also so many settled Central American communities here in this country, which is why people like, Miguel and I live here, right? We're not here por gusto. Like, there's a reason why our families came to this country in particular. And so Teaching Central America, a lot of the work that I do as a program specialist is that I support teachers in giving professional development. giving workshops to help them understand, well, what are our resources? What are the lesson plans that we have? What are some really important concepts, some important historical context that you can use in your classroom? How to use our resources, and just empowering people with knowledge, empowering people with the truth. Because our schools do not teach about Central America. Our schools don't teach about Latinos. They don't teach about anything that doesn't, no les conviene, right?
I think that all they do is like
Right.
Cesar Chavez, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Well,
If at all,
That's all
right?
we learn.
Yeah.
Well, here in Arkansas, I think in like California, they're a little more
A lot
progressive
more.
on that.
Ahead, way ahead.
And I think it's because of like Latino teachers that are changing like the curriculum a
Right.
little
Extra
bit.
culture out there and different
Yeah.
kinds.
Right.
Too. Yeah.
And just because we're a bilingual podcast, we're gonna switch it up a little bit to
Let's do
Spanish
it.
a little bit.
But I was gonna say no, like his job, like that's kind of important, dude. Like I didn't realize that, like watching Narcos, you know, like a Netflix TV series that like a lot of the reasons that like people from Central America, like they came here because the U.S. supplied guns to every mother lover out there, you know, so the streets became dangerous,
Right.
you know, and then so they kind of had to flee the war, and then just that violence.
And did the war really end with the gangs and all these things?
It's a
you know?
self-inflicted wound, you know, like anyway, if they call it that, yeah.
Right.
¿Puedes hablar un poquito sobre el historial en El Salvador? ¿Por qué la gente de El Salvador, o cuál fue una de las más grandes cosas que causó que mucha gente de El Salvador se moviera para aquí, para Estados Unidos? Porque yo no sé mucho del historial de El Salvador o cómo a lo mejor Estados Unidos fue parte de la razón por qué muchos salvadoreños vienen para acá, para este país.
Bueno, es una historia muy larga, muy compleja, ¿verdad? Muchos nos vamos a enfocar mucho en las guerras de los 70s, de los 80s. Tenemos a Guatemala que, por ejemplo, su guerra duró 36 años. Desde los 50 hasta el 96, el año en que yo nací. Yo soy guatemalteco también. Pero en El Salvador la guerra había empezado algunos dicen que el 79, otros que el 80. Y pues era una década, más de una década, como unos 12 años de guerra muy violenta, una de las guerras más sangrientas de la historia humana y de ese siglo, de los 1900. Entonces, o sea, la gente oye por la violencia. Había una dictadura, una serie de dictaduras que antes que la guerra también, o sea, estos siglos de violencia colonial, imperialista, donde había gente rica y gente pobre. La gente rica le quitaba terrenos, le quitaba tierra a la gente indígena, la gente originaria de este territorio que hoy en día llamamos El Salvador. La gente campesina también, o sea, ellos vivían de la tierra, vivían de la cosecha. Y los ricos les quitaban todo, con violencia, con política, con gobierno, por siglos y siglos. Y la gente tenía revueltas, la gente tenía rebeliones contra estos gobiernos. Entonces la violencia es una gran parte de la historia de El Salvador, de los ricos contra los pobres y los pobres defendiéndose. Y esto o sea, con décadas y décadas de estas pobrezas, de estas violencias, estos genocidios por las mismas dictaduras de El Salvador que tenían mucho apoyo de los Estados Unidos. Esto nos llevó a lo que luego fue los 80s, donde ya la gente ya estaba harta. La gente ya estaba harta y no importaba cuánto protestaban, cuánto intentaban cambiar el gobierno, se dieron cuenta de que este gobierno no nos tiene compasión, no quiere que las cosas cambien, entonces va a ser a puro tubo, como dice el salvadoreño. O sea, vamos a cambiarlo con guerra civil, vamos a ser revolucionarios y sacar el gobierno que existe, porque este gobierno nos quiere matar, nos está matando, nos quiere pobres, nos quiere sin educación, sin doctores, porque habían tantas tasas altas de muertes infantiles, tanta violencia contra el pueblo desde el gobierno, y la gente se hartó, y este era el momento en que Cuba ya tenía su revolución, donde los comunistas ganaron. Y esto fue durante la guerra civil, la guerra fría, ¿va? Donde los Estados Unidos, Rusia, y otros poderes, China estaban, o sea, armando conflicto de manera global. Entonces los Estados Unidos miraba hacia el sur, miraba de que El Salvador, este país chiquititito, ¿va? Tenía una revolución que se estaba armando también contra la dictadura que los Estados Unidos quería mantener en poder porque los Estados Unidos también sacaba dinero de la explotación del pueblo. Y esta revolución, esta dictadura, pues se estaban enfrentando. Los Estados Unidos quería armar y financiar y apoyar a la dictadura de ese tiempo. Y pues de ahí salieron miles y miles de muertos, mucha violencia, escuadrones de muerte que torturaban, violaban, o sea, tanto trauma en este país pequeño. Y cuando cualquier ser humano en este tipo de conflicto, para sobrevivir, va a huir. Pero han habido tantas personas que ya estaban empezando a huir y llegaron a los Estados Unidos porque ahí es donde querían trabajadores, ahí los recibían. Y la verdad es que mucha gente, ni los mismos salvadoreños, conocemos esta historia. Esta es una historia que se nos niega en El Salvador, en nuestro sistema educativo. No es una historia que nos van a contar aquí. Y pues, ¿por qué? ¿Cuál imperio va a querer contar lo que ellos hicieron? ¿Cuál imperio va a querer, to tell on themselves, right? Confesarse lo que le hicieron, que han sido crímenes contra la humanidad. Que hoy en día, igual, los Estados Unidos nunca ha pedido perdón, nunca ha tenido contabilidad por su violencia, pero aquí estamos los que nos mudamos, aquí estamos los que somos descendientes de ese trauma, de esa violencia, y desafortunadamente, en mi opinión, en mi humilde opinión, estamos viendo otra dictadura más en este país.
I was about to ask you
con Bukele.
Yeah, I was about to ask you because the majority of the Salvadorians that I speak with are in favor of everything he's doing. But there are some, like yourself, I'm guessing, and like some other people in this community who, just like me, you know, I'm obviously of Mexican descent, but I have a lot of trouble thinking about innocent people being incarcerated because of what he's trying to do. But then I also understand how the Salvadorian people have been in panic for decades of the safety of this country, and the Salvadorians here want to go visit El Salvador and feel safe, and they want their family members not to be victims of violence, and how like cleaning up the streets the way that they did it has caused a lot of peace for people. But at the same time, I've met people who have family members that are incarcerated that are innocent. Maybe because they had a tattoo, maybe because someone just called the police and said that they were gang affiliated when they weren't. So I definitely want to hear what you have. What are your thoughts? I know you've thought about this a lot, so I want to hear where you're at with that as a Salvadorian yourself.
I mean, it's a messy situation, you know, like Bukele does have a lot of support. Most Salvadorans do support Bukele. That's just the reality, right? Because the reality is, like, you know, he did pass some really intense policies that did put a lot of people in prison, especially gang members. And, you know, who doesn't want safety? Who doesn't want peace? Who doesn't want to walk out in the street and not fear for their life, right? That's a basic human necessity, a basic human desire. And so it makes total sense why people support Bukele and support his policies, you know, his state of exception. But my thing as a historian and my thing as somebody that knows the history of Central America and teaches people to understand Central America, right, is there is nothing good is going to come from a president violating the Constitution, a Constitution that was made after we left a dictatorship in 1992. This Constitution was made, this specific line where you will not have a second term as president to avoid dictatorships in the future. There is nothing good that's going to come from a president that throws an entire constitution made after a dictatorship away. There is nothing good that comes from building prisons, a mega prison, and taking away people's constitutional rights to due process, because anybody can get picked off the street and be accused of being a gang member, and there's no due process.
And they'll say, and he says, like, if any of the human rights folks, like the international human rights folks, have any issues with it, then they should go ahead and take their prisoners with them. And it's like, that's not a...
There's nothing, you know, and he's trying to put journalists in jail. journalists' job is to tell stories, to tell the truth,
That's
even if they
familiar.
criticize you. Right? It's familiar.
Yeah.
We criticize Cuba when they do it. We criticize Venezuela and Chavez when they do that. So we're going to let Bukele get away with putting journalists in jail. They're putting people in jail for protesting. Which is a constitutional right. They're putting people in jail for allegedly being war criminals and fighting against a dictatorship back in the 80s. When there's the story of Santa Marta right now. There's people fighting in this place called Santa Marta. They were a really big FMLN stronghold. And since after the war, they weren't revolutionaries anymore, but they were fighting to protect their land because they were fighting the government, and they successfully protested and organized to pass laws that banned the mining of metals in the country, which Bukele is now trying to bring metal mining back into the country, which destroys land, pollutes water, destroys people's lives. And so, and it's now we're a Bitcoin country, the only country in the world that has Bitcoin as national currency, right?
Yeah, I saw
Just
that.
like US dollar runs our economy, which that's a whole other thing with US empire in the mix. But there's nothing good that ever comes from taking away people's rights, making anybody a criminal if you say so. And if you say anything about Bukele, like against Bukele in El Salvador on social media, you will get attacked by Bukele trolls. And it's just fanaticism that can get very violent. And to me as a historian, I'm seeing the same patterns that we saw in previous dictatorships and throughout history that led to our civil war, that led to over 75,000 people being killed in the country. The same patterns. I'm watching the same patterns happening again with Bukele. And right now it looks cute. It looks pretty. The streets are safe. The gangs are gone. But what happens when the Constitution is gone and then you say something or do something that allows the government to say, well, now you're a criminal for saying this and doing that. Anybody that has anything to say against this government is going to go to prison, is going to get killed. And we have historical precedents that set this up for him, where he is a dictator. By political definition,
Well, he even
is
puts
a
it on
dictator.
his Twitter bio. In his Twitter bio, it says like world's funnest dictator or something like that.
The world's coolest dictator.
Yeah, world's coolest.
He's proud of it, the thing about him
Yeah,
is
that's a hell of a marketing campaign.
Well,
he's a good marketing guy.
If you look at his TikTok and see the stuff that he posts, if you see that, you're like, oh wow, this guy's like the greatest president of all time, because he shows like the streets being clean. Him like his people rallying up gangsters from different neighborhoods, and like he has them all like lined up in the prison, like and there was times where they wouldn't feed some of the prisoners in the Salvador jails to try to teach a lesson to some of the people that were affiliated with the people in jail that were outside. And like to what extent do we get to that we just don't feed people? Like
I mean, and that's the thing, like trauma, right? Like we are a traumatized people. We're a traumatized country. Like people are so traumatized by the very real gang violence that happened in the country before too. Like gangs were brutal. Gangs were murdering people.
Murder capital of the world.
Murder
baby.
capital of the world. Like
Well, I mean, I shouldn't say baby after it.
Yeah.
that's trauma, right? Of course we want to take these extreme measures to improve our country, to feel safe again. But at the same time, it's like, at what cost? At what cost, where we're going back into another dictatorship? And people are starting to wake up now, because it's like, oh wait, my kid didn't do anything. He's not a gangster. Why is he in jail? Why did my dad die in jail when he was just going to work early one morning, and the cops could just say, hey, you look like you're a gang member, you're going to jail. You have no rights. Sorry. And that's happening more and more. And poverty is going up in the country. But Bitcoin and foreigners coming to the country to use Bitcoin and build properties based on Bitcoin, they're getting richer, but Salvadorans are getting poorer. And people are waking up to that now. Everything sounds beautiful on TikTok. Everything sounds beautiful when a president is making these big, beautiful speeches. But when you look at the actual policies, when you look at the language in these policies, and you look at the outcomes of these policies, are things really as beautiful as they seem?
Yeah. And do you think he's gonna get himself I don't want to say reelected, but like, do you think that he's gonna continue after this term is supposed to be over? and find ways to like keep on going.
Hasn't he already done that? Hasn't he already gone past?
I don't know
his
that.
term?
I
He
don't know
already
the
broke the
change.
Constitution
Yeah.
and becoming the president for a second term.
Do you know what change was done to the Constitution in regards to like, was it like, oh, he can go for a second term, or was it for he can go as long as he wants
Pretty
to
sure
go?
it's indefinite. Like, as long as the people vote me into power, I will continue to be a president.
Because the people do vote him in, right?
And
like
a lot of them
I
do,
mean,
yeah.
there's probably election fraud everywhere in every country, so maybe there might be a little bit of it, but just based on the conversations that I've had with Salvadorians here, like they see him as their guy, just the same way that a lot of conservatives or younger men see Trump as their guy, you know, and that is scary when you think about.
I feel like, I think I just got a little more educated today.
That's good. That's why we brought Jonathan.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so like the difference between Trump and Bukele, like they're similar dudes, and
They're homies now, too.
Yeah. And then now Bitcoin's really gonna come in things to anyway, but the way I saw it, like here the difference is that like even though like we try to sell it on like media that we're violent and we're getting taken over and there's all this murder going on, like we're pretty okay compared to like third world countries and stuff like that, like.
You're talking about the U.S.
Yeah, I'm talking about the U.S. here, but like I felt like in El Salvador, being the murder capital of the world, like how do you get rid of all that? Like you have to go in there with a fucking contuvo, like you said, and fucking just like, kind of like, but that's kind of like the mass deportation thing now, isn't it? But I mean, but how else do you clean up those streets? Like you have to do that. Like that was my take on it. Like
I don't have the answers to that, but I do think that it's work that takes a long time, and people
Quick fixes are just gimmicks.
Yeah, but they please people.
But they please people, and that's the problem.
People see that and they're like,
Instant
oh yeah, like
gratification.
fast. They happen fast, because I'm not a huge fan of the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, but she was talking about one of the things that I do agree with her is that it's part of like you have to tackle the culture first. You have to also give opportunities for younger folks to have different platforms to do things that will take their minds out of getting involved with gangs or opportunities and stuff. But unfortunately, I mean, there are in these countries, in Salvador or in Mexico in the past, gangs force you to join. Sometimes they don't have an option. Sometimes they'll be told like, if you don't join, then we will kill you. And that's happening right now in Guanajuato and Zacatecas and all these different parts of Mexico. So there are situations where like people don't have an option, but you do kind of have to start by tackling the culture first, and that takes a long time. Like Mexico, the violence is not going to end until like maybe even like decades from now. Like it's not going to happen soon.
Yeah. But another thing too is like the gangs and these gang networks took decades to build. It took years and years to build. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And so what would happen if we instead of spending millions and billions into building the continent's biggest mega prison, we invested that money in hundreds of after-school programs, hundreds of youth programs, hundreds of gang rehabilitation services, hundreds of drug addiction centers, hundreds of hospitals, hundreds of schools. What if we created more jobs? What for young people especially? What if we created workforce development, programs? What if we created food stamps, a food stamp structure, or some kind of structure that gets people food when they need it? What if we give people their basic necessities so that they don't have to fight to survive, so that they have what they need to survive, so that we can attack the cultural shift by giving youth different opportunities to learn new skills, to learn different mindsets, to have mentors? What if we had hundreds and hundreds of these in every corner of the country? What would happen in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? And that's what the research says works. But we are choosing not to read the research. We're choosing not to look at the models that actually work because we want to punish the other person that hurt us so bad out of trauma. But it's also what sells, it sells.
Yeah.
And private prison companies are making a killing right now.
Talking about prisons, they're wanting to open a new prison here in Arkansas, and they're about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars doing so. And me, for the past, I think about 6 years now, I've been working in the nonprofit space here in Northwest Arkansas. So I meet with a bunch of the leaders from different nonprofits, and there's some nonprofits that are trying to do that kind of work. Like, I think about the Station, for example, that has created an environment where they get a lot of young people to come do different extracurricular activities so that they can get involved in something, like right when they're either about to graduate high school or when they're still in high school. But it's not enough. Like, there's not enough resources. There's like several nonprofits that are trying to do that kind of work, but unless millions and millions of dollars get invested in it, like, it can help some people, but it's not gonna change the culture.
So that's what I was gonna say. I feel like that's the problem with politics. I feel like all these things that all these politicians want to do, it takes time. You can't just fix the economy and fix everybody be happy in like 8 years, and that's why every 8 years we'll switch back over because he didn't get it done, 4 or 8 years, so obviously it's not working. So they don't feel the effect, and then they get switched over, and then the other motherfucker comes in, and then they switch it back, take all, and then try to put their stuff, but then their stuff doesn't work because it's not enough time. So then same thing. Here comes the other guy, rips his shit apart, And
they rip it on purpose too. Like just because they're like political rivals, they'll be like, like for example, people wanting to terminate DACA, like that program's working. Like, there's literally, you're giving people, young undocumented people, an opportunity to get a house, get their driver's license. They're giving money to the economy. They're literally paying in every 2 years all this money to be able to renew, but people still want to terminate it just because it goes against their political agenda, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir, Jonathan, when I'm talking to you about this, but it is frustrating.
I think I think what upsets you the most is things that are gonna help everyone. Like universal health care with Bill Clinton. Like things that were gonna help like all Americans, but they're like, oh hell yeah, healthcare. Oh wait, you're gonna help Juan too? Oh no, fuck that. We don't need that shit.
Well, look, even I do gotta say though that even Bill Clinton's policies had effects on people. Like, for example, excluded a lot of the Marshallese people,
incarceration,
and yeah. So it's very flawed, but I do think that, like you said,
no. I mean, the incarceration, that 3-strike rule, that did pass. What didn't pass was the healthcare part.
Yeah,
and I think we live in a country that wealth and whiteness rule. Those are the 2 W's that run this country: wealth and whiteness. Does it make me money? Will white supremacy continue to exist? Will it hurt white supremacy or help white supremacy? Will it hurt wealth, which is mostly in white elites' hands? And so those are the 2 things that these politicians that don't want to pass these things, like universal health care that actually help people.
Yeah,
if it doesn't do these 2 things.
It always got me when I guess white people, but poor white people. It's like, this is gonna help you, and nope, not having it.
Because their marketing is so good. White elites trick poor white people into thinking that, hey, we're working for you too, but the only thing going for them is that they're white. And that's where they use racism as a weapon to convince them that they're on your side, It's not us taking money away from you. It's that poor immigrant coming to take away your stuff.
Which is, and I know it's obvious, with this presidency, Trump just won, and that's the perfect example of it, right? Like, what is Trump going to do that's going to help poor white folks? Like, what... And
you're gonna do mass deportation so the white people can start working at the plants, man.
But look, let's be honest though. Like, when I was 16 years old, I worked at Georgie's for a summer program, but I was put on the line just like every other worker. I was working there with the line in the poultry industry, and that place, anybody can apply to that place, right? It doesn't matter who you are. You can apply. You're gonna make minimum wage for the most part, but or close to minimum wage. It's changed now, but it was minimum wage back then. But you would see white folks join, and a week later they would leave. They would quit. because it was just the
much.
labor was
Too
really
hard.
hard. The only white folks that you would see there that would be consistent would be like supervisors or managers. The
Who
people
can't communicate with their employees.
the people that would be there would be Latinos, Marshallese, and then even the poultry factories ended up bringing Puerto Ricans from Puerto Rico specifically to work the poultry industry. So even if you say like, oh, like we're gonna deport all these people and they're gonna be all these different jobs, the jobs are there right now.
My mom worked at Tyson, and she said that even in the lines, and she said white people didn't even make it to lunch.
No, I saw several people quit. I saw several white people quit like that. Like even before the day was halfway because it was too much work or like they'd have to pick up heavy things. And it just like even if I just went to California a few months ago and I passed by the fields where my parents used to work, the lettuce fields, the onions fields, it's all just brown people. There's hardly any white people working there.
And that's on purpose, you know?
So
And then that brings me back to education, right? Like, we allow these things to keep happening. We don't question these things because nothing in our education, nothing in what we've learned teaches us to question, helps us give us context for why is it just brown people working and white people, like, managing us, right? There's a reason. There's a history behind that. We live in the plantation South. That's exactly how it was back then. There's a history there for why labor is organized the way that it is. There's a history for why they want to do mass deportations again. They did it before, Operation Wetback, back in the 40s, 50s or so. And so, like, if we don't know these histories, if we're not taught these histories, which is left out on purpose, if we don't know reasons why people migrate, if we don't understand these things and learn to question them, how are we ever going to address it? How are we ever going to approach it? How are we ever going to get together and finally do something about it? To me, like, education is like where we really do those cultural shifts to change a country, to change people's minds. But it's also where we can learn the skills to teach us how to take action. Because I think, you know, I come from an ethnic studies tradition, which is where California, you know, ethnic studies education is really, really robust and strong right now in California. California is the only, like, the only state where it's a graduation requirement, where you have to take a class in African American studies, Latino studies, Asian American studies, Native American Indigenous studies. It's a graduation requirement now, and that took decades of building. And you know, so ethnic studies is a kind of education where we learn our histories, we learn our literature, we learn about the issues that are about our community, things that are specific to our neighborhoods, because so much of learning is so disconnected from us. Read this book by William Shakespeare. Learn about the Civil War, learn how to do algebra, Hamlet, right? And for your local brown kid, well, you know, maybe those of us that, you know, were good in school, quote unquote, right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to do what I got to do because I got to get good grades, I got to graduate. But for a lot of other kids, if this isn't connecting with me, this is a waste of my time. Why am I doing this, right? Especially when your schools feel more like prisons than actual places of welcome and learning.
yeah.
And so, you know, our to me, like, and not just schools, but education. And education doesn't have to be in a school building either, but a real education that teaches us to be human, that teaches us to be empowered, that teaches us to question and to take action. That is a kind of education that I think can lead to these bigger shifts that allow us to become fuller humans, to fight for all of our humanity at the end of the day.
And I saw you were doing work like that, right? You were doing education work outside of schools in Georgia. You were doing. Can you talk a little bit about that work, specifically, like focused on like kids of color, of work that you've done or that you're still doing in Georgia at the moment?
Yeah. So I teach 6th grade language arts in a school building. But then I also, I've built like Latino studies curriculum. I've taught Latino studies courses in different pockets of Atlanta. Whatever nonprofit will give me the space to just teach this. And whatever nonprofit will give me access to school kids to teach this in schools through a nonprofit. It's how I've, you know, done it the last few years. But these last 4 years, I've been with a lot of other folks in my community. We built something called Escuelitas, where we prioritize like teaching Latino history, Latino studies. So going through like Mexican American history, Black Latino history, Indigenous history, Central American history. And so we have a space for adults where we're teaching them these histories in Spanish in the first hour, and in the second hour, They're learning, like, know your rights, you know, as an immigrant, how to organize to not get evicted in your apartment complex from people in California who have done this for years, for example, right? And then with the kids, we have a middle school section and an elementary school section where they're also learning Latino history. They're learning to improve their reading and their writing. You know, that's kind of how we bring the parents in. Like, we're going to tutor your kids with their homework. We're going to get them better in reading and writing and math, right? But they're also going to learn about their history. They're going to learn about their culture. They're going to learn about how in history, how did people just like us fight back against deportation, take care of each other against police brutality, right? Like, we're teaching real history, we're teaching the truth, while they're also getting better at school, you know? And so, you know, it's ethnic studies education is very much about that. It's like, how do we still help you become like a strong academic student, but most importantly, an intellectual student, to ask questions, to know things that nobody else will teach you, to hopefully become more social justice oriented, become a better human, a more empathetic human, and to take action in your community, become a leader in your community to change things if you're not satisfied with the way that things are.
Do you get any pushback for that kind of teaching? Just by anybody, whether it be
The state of Georgia, state of Arkansas, they've banned, you know, the teaching of racism, white privilege, teaching about slavery a certain kind of way, to teach about LGBTQ issues. You know, like, there's literal laws in Arkansas and in Georgia at the same time. You know, they're part of that big wave where they're trying to censor and limit education. Florida, I think, is the model for what that looks like, because they've really destroyed, like, open-minded education. They're trying to really create the perfect Nazi education. But it's happening already. In the legislation that we're seeing, like, it's already happening. And luckily, I live in a community that is all brown folks, Asian folks, black folks. My students represent that in my out-of-school program, but also in school. And so my students are getting so much from that education that I'm not getting pushback at all.
Okay.
Maybe if I taught in a wealthier, whiter, more conservative community, I wouldn't even have a job at this point. But I'm not getting pushback because my kids are learning about their history for the first time. As black kids, as Latino kids, as indigenous kids, as Asian kids, in a way that it's like, yo, like, why don't I learn this in all my classes? Why isn't all my education like this, right? And so we're not California, where this is just normal at this point in the education system. But I'm trying to build a little pocket where my kids will experience this, their parents will experience this, and they'll grow up and become the ones who advocate for this to become part of the education system in the South.
I mean, I felt like going to school, especially like in high school, one of the best teachers that I remember now are the ones that did stick out and kind of did go outside the curriculum and like be real and like and tell you what's really going on in the world and politics. And you know, you always had that weird English teacher that would, you know, just be like kind of straight up with you. And so yeah, man, I think you're doing it. Those are the people you remember, you know.
Yeah, I hope so. And they're sixth graders, you know, they're kids. And so with my really, really small kids, sixth graders, like, I'm hoping that, you know, middle school is going to be awful. I think middle school is just wild for all of us. We're changing, we're growing up, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that with the younger we get them, like, the more their minds develop to be different, you know? And not let racism in society, immigration policy in society destroy them so young. Like, I see it as like giving them armor to confront society, because it's not going to get any different overnight. They just got to know to love themselves and believe in themselves and know that we come from decades of people fighting and that we can do it too. And that it's not me, it's the system, and the system has to change, not me.
I'd love to get you involved, because we're about to start organizing again here locally, you know, specifically with immigrants and stuff. And I would love for you to get involved, even if it's like a Zoom basis where you can kind of educate all of us as to, you know, maybe there's a way that organizing needs to be approached at this point differently in regards to the kind of education that you provide your students, because a lot of the folks that will be joining us will probably be organizing for the first time, and I think they're perfect to kind of have a conversation with you on just how to view things like even borders, how to view that, or how to view a system that is still very racist. And I feel like a lot of the times people, I don't know if they ignore that, or they just because of America, kind of tells you that as long as you work hard, that you can accomplish everything. So a lot of people do feel that they all have the equal opportunity to excel in whatever it is in this country, but they don't really know about like the barriers that are put there that sometimes might look invisible until you confront them or until you experience certain things, but that we have to be aware of, when we're not only organizing, but, trying to climb a corporate ladder or trying to run for office or all these different things. And I feel you can provide feedback that can kind of even educate someone like me in regards to view things in a different way based on your research and based on the education. So hopefully we can connect on that, Jonathan.
Yeah,
I think
this is home. I'm here to build with y'all,
I think your feedback. And is there any place where people can support your work? Is there like a website where people can go and support the work that you're doing with teaching for Central America?
Yeah, so for Teaching Central America, go to teachingcentralamerica.org. Sign up for our newsletter, donate, help us fund this work. It's a national project. So help us support getting Central America in the classroom across the country. This is part of the Teaching for Change, a broader organization that also does a lot of just social justice education across different topics. If you want to follow my local work in Atlanta, you can follow me on Instagram at buhi, BUHI_educator. Just follow the work, and I'm happy to collaborate and help folks try to do this wherever it is it may be, especially the most rural, isolated places. These are the places where we can build new things that need to happen, and we can do it together. Nobody has to do it alone.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. And for everybody listening, that was the end of the episode. I'm so glad Jonathan came, and I caught him last minute at a coffee shop, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing in 2 days?" Like, right. Can you come on the pod? You were like, "What pod?" Oh, of course. So I'm glad we were able to make this work and just educate people. You think you provided a lot of knowledge where our listeners will definitely be learning just like we are. And I think it's important, like kind of going back to what Mick said, is there's things that sometimes we learn along this journey, and we definitely have to take that and just be better with that knowledge, and just be more aware of our neighbors and just be more loving with our neighbors. But for everybody listening,
mental health.
Oh yeah, I forgot my signature question. Thanks for reminding me, Mix. Thanks for reminding me. We have a signature question that we ask every one of our guests whenever they come here to the studio. What do you do to take care of your mental health?
It's a good one. I think I'm still figuring it out, but I think that something that gives me a lot of joy, that helps me feel back in my body again, is working out, going to the gym, and dancing. I like to dance, and I like working out. Somebody once told me motion is lotion. Motion is lotion.
Okie dokie.
So yeah, mental health, motion is lotion.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And for everybody listening, that was the end of this episode. My name is Irvin.
And I'm Miggs.
And we're signing off.